Well, here we are as the Cardinals open training camp and get ready for the 2021 season. I'm Howard Balzer. Donnie Druin is here, Millard Thomas as well, and we're going to talk about a variety of issues today in this first of what we hope to be many Cardinals podcasts. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to break down the positions for the team as we go through each position, give our thoughts on them, the key players, and all those relevant aspects, and then we'll move on to some other topics. But first, we'll start with the most obvious, and that is quarterback, of course, led by Kyler Murray and Colt McCoy, the new backup. Chris Streveler is back from last year, but certainly, guys, so much for this Cardinals team depends on the progress of Kyler Murray in this camp and going into the season.
Yeah, I don't think there's really much to say that's negative about Kyler Murray. I mean, I don't know if there's much to say about Kyler Murray in general. I mean, we all want to see big things for him in year 3. Things have been not as explosive maybe or as consistent as we might have thought with that Cliff and Kyler Murray connection through those first 2 years. There's been a little hiccups in the offense. Sometimes in that red zone, they don't seem to be as smooth as we might think, but we see all the talent in the world with Kyler Murray. I mean, this is a guy, if he won the MVP award next season, I don't think it would surprise a lot of people, but I think we want to see a little bit more from the passing game. I think he probably wants to run a little bit less because I don't think he likes getting hit so far in the NFL level. I mean, that dude has been getting beat up in his first couple of seasons. So I think they're going to be passing a little bit more from the QB standpoint. I think he's going to be running a little bit less, maybe put the ball in his running back's hands a little bit more. So I want to see what this offense looks like in year 3. Is it going to be more smooth than what we've seen the first couple of years? Because I'm still a little hesitant on the Cliff Kingsbury experience so far.
Yeah, and I definitely think you were not alone in that sentiment, Millard. I mean, you already kind of hit the nail on the head. Year 3 is a very big year for the Arizona Cardinals when it comes to Kyler Murray's development. We know he has a rocket launcher for an arm. We know he can make plays with his legs. Can he soak himself and absorb himself inside of the offense, inside of Cliff Kingsbury's offense, and make the right reads, make the right progressions, and be consistent, like you had said? That's going to be something a lot of people are going to be watching for. We know the talent is there, but can he do all of the small things between running, between making plays with his arm downfield and throwing it to DeAndre Hopkins? Can he do the small things? And if he can do the smaller things, and, whether that be hitting receivers, in intermediate routes, whether that be, deciding to tuck away instead of trying to make a play and end up throwing an interception like we've seen him do a handful of times over the last year. If he's able to do those small things, then I think we'll see a lot of great things from the Cardinals offense.
And the key before we move on to another position, certainly with Murray, you guys all make good points. One is cutting down on the passes deflected at or near the line of scrimmage. That's number one thing. But as you noted, that this third year is a key one, not only for development, because important decisions have to be made after that. Because after the third year, it's time to decide whether to give a fifth-year option. It's hard to imagine the Cardinals won't do that, but that fifth-year option is a commitment with guaranteed money. And it's also, though, after the third year that a new long-term contract can be negotiated if the team chooses to do that. So if Kyler Murray takes big steps this year, all of a sudden what we've heard for so long about the Cardinals being able to do other things with the salary cap because they have the quarterback on the rookie contract, that's not going to be the case for very much longer. So that's a look at the quarterbacks. Colt McCoy, I would expect to be the backup for this team. That's why they signed him. We'll see if Chris Streveler stays around, if maybe he has a little more role on special teams than he did last year. We move on. We might as well move on to the wide receivers, who are the guys that Kyler Murray is obviously going to be thrown to. So let's be quick on our comments. We don't want to go into every guy. Obviously, we have DeAndre Hopkins. We have A.J. Green added to it. A certain amount of discussion about him. Christian Kirk. Key year for him because he's going into a contract year. And then we have the rookie Rondale Moore plus Andy Isabella, who's been a little bit of a disappointment, Keyshawn Johnson, and a bunch of other free agents. So a lot of guys going to be competing for jobs. But I think, guys, that maybe the most important player in this equation is A.J. Green. A lot of people think he doesn't have much left, but if he does, he'll be able to take a lot of pressure off DeAndre Hopkins in that offense.
Yeah, my biggest question is who's going to be that number 2 in that offense right now, because we've kind of been waiting Christian Kirk to be that guy. He's had a couple injuries. I think he's shown some flashes, but he just hasn't been that consistent in this Cardinals offense. Like you said, Andy, Isabella, I think we're all off that bandwagon right now. So right now it's going to come down to an AJ Green or a Christian Kirk. And after watching last season, I mean, I played a lot of fantasy football. AJ Green was pretty frustrating to have on my team every week. He would get you 10 to 12 targets and come down with like 2 for 20 every week. So maybe with Kyler Murray, it's a better connection, but I'm starting to think AJ Green might be on the very end of his NFL career.
Yeah, it certainly appears that way, and I think the Bengals thought that way. I think that's why they weren't too shy about letting him go in the manner that he did. And having a non-solidified number 2 option across from a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, it kind of worries you a little bit. We know Christian Kirk can make plays from time to time, but just like Kyler Murray, we haven't necessarily seen that consistency you want to see out of a guy like Kirk. Rondale Moore is another, probable guy who's, drafted to make big plays here in Arizona. Andy Isabella, like Millard said, not a lot of people are too keen on him. Even Keyshawn Johnson hasn't relatively been the guy that many people expect him to be. We're still waiting to see whether or not Larry Fitzgerald comes back. But aside from DeAndre Hopkins, and don't get me wrong, Nuke is one of the best, if not the best receiver in the NFL. So certainly a wide receiver core can always use the talents of him. But aside from Hopkins, if AJ Green continues on the current trajectory that he has, if guys like Isabella and Johnson don't step up, this receiver core is definitely top heavy in my opinion.
I am going to be a little contrary to a lot of people, and I think AJ Green, I'm not sitting here going to say he's going to be a Pro Bowl caliber, but I think his ability, and he will be energized to prove that he still has something left. He's not going to be double teamed in that offense because there's going to be so much attention paid to DeAndre Hopkins. And so I think that Green will be able to make some plays. And then if the defense starts having to account for him, then that might open up things even more for Hopkins. So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch on this team. We're also all watching and waiting. Is Larry Fitzgerald going to play anymore? I don't know when he's going to make a darn decision, but we're all wondering and waiting on that. Let's move on to the tight ends. This is one position that there isn't a whole lot right now. There's some pretty good blockers in Max Williams and Darrell Daniels. Of course, Dan Arnold moved on in free agency to Carolina. He had some big plays last season for the Cardinals. So I'm beginning to wonder if the Cardinals are even going to use the tight end that much in the passing game with all the receivers they have and just count on those guys mostly for blocking in the running game.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I feel right now. I mean, I feel like the tight end position with the Cardinals historically had just been pretty irrelevant. I mean, aren't they still waiting for like their first 100-yard receiver or something from the tight end position? I mean, I know we had a lot of hope and expectations for Dan Arnold last year, and I'm not really too sure why. I guess he was a training camp star, but I didn't think Dan Arnold was that big of a talent going into last season, and it kind of proved itself out. And going into next year, Max Williams was a pretty high pedigree guy, drafted pretty high in the NFL draft a few years ago, but this is his second team, I believe, with the Arizona Cardinals. And I'm just not a big Max Williams guy or the guys behind him. So I think, like you said, Howard, this is going to be more of a run blocking kind of group instead of a pass catching group like you see with the Chiefs or some of these other teams that really utilize their tight end.
Yeah, I think whenever you mention the Arizona Cardinals and the tight end position in the same breath, you're not really expecting too much. I know we had a flash in the pan from Ricky Stillers-Jones a couple of years ago, but other than that, not a whole lot. And I think the best way to kind of sum it up for the Cardinals and their affliction with the tight end position, it is what it is. I don't think that offense minds not having a George Kittle or a Travis Kelce on their team. It seems to function just fine without it whenever all cylinders are clicking. So I'm not too sure Cliff Kingsbury is going to be losing sleep over not having a solidified tight end.
We will wrap up the offensive side of the ball with what's mostly, but probably the most important part of the offense. While everyone focuses on the quarterback and the skill guys and the running ball, I started to say that. I started to go to the offensive line before going to the running back. So I had to take a little backtrack here before we get to the offensive line because we need to talk about the running backs. And, of course, we saw Kenyon Drake leave in the offseason. The Cardinals did add James Conner to go with Chase Edmonds. Some other players that they have that you wonder if they're going to be able to contribute. Who knows? Jonathan Ward, Benjamin, whatever. But it seems to me those two guys, Conner and Edmonds, are going to be the key. And I really believe, guys, that I have my questions of whether Chase Edmonds can truly be a, quote, bell cow back, where you're going to give him 20 to 25 touches in the running and passing game on a week-to-week basis. So that's why I think Connor could be most important for this offense. One of you guys mentioned earlier, the red zone. That's where a guy like Connor can really help, because most teams that are successful in the red zone have the ability to run or pass. And if a team doesn't respect the run, then they're going to gang up on those guys, and there's not as much room to operate with your receivers. So I think Connor can be a great, maybe I shouldn't say great, but I think he can be a very good red zone guy, a good short yardage player, and really complement Edmonds well in his backfield. But I think of the entire offense, I think that position might be the biggest question going into training camp for the Cardinals.
Yeah, I like it, James Conner, but he just has such a scary health history. I don't know if he could last the full season. Chase Edmonds is definitely tiny, but I think he can be the number one running back. I don't know if he could be a bell cow, like you said. I don't know if he could be a Derrick Henry, 25 touch kind of guy, but I can see a Chase Edmonds like an Austin Eckler, who's not really the in-between tackles kind of guy for the Chargers, but he gets all the pass catching opportunities, and he still picks up 10 to 12 carries a game. They usually have some dude like Justin Jackson or something running in between the tackles, maybe taking it in between the 20s. So I think Connor could be maybe the more red zone guy, goal line situations. That's the kind of, time for James Conner, or it could be the time for Chase Edmonds if you want to have that versatility with your pass catching and your running ability. So I think Edmonds still has the ability to be the number one option. I could see it being a 60-40 split, Edmonds being on the field 60% of the time compared to Connor's 40%. But if you told me it was flipped and Connor is having a breakout season and he's back, he's healthy, he's playing a full course of games, he definitely has the talent to be a number one option too. So, I'm kind of on the fence here, but I think both of these guys have enough talent to be the number one option. But I would probably lean Edmonds over James Conner because of that health history. And he just looked explosive anytime he's the main guy in this offense.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's too much questioning the talent of Chase Edmonds. I think it's so much how much of his talent can be exfoliated over the course of the game. And I think that's why you bring in a running back like James Conner. I think the presence of James Conner will help the presence of Chase Edmonds and vice versa. Both of these running backs do bring valuable skill sets to the table. James Conner, whenever he is healthy, has provided a very valuable asset to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and now he finds himself in Arizona. And I think that's the big key when James Conner is healthy, which hasn't been too much over the last couple of seasons. You get him in Arizona, you don't ask James Conner to be the bell cow running back like you guys have said. He'll maybe get 10 touches a game, and you let Chase Edmonds do a lot of the work, and I think that'll create a very healthy tandem in Arizona's backfield.
Well, we now do move on to what I've always say is the most important part of any offensive football team, because you can have all the talent in the world at quarterback and running back and wide receiver and tight end, but if you don't have the offensive line to open up the holes for the running game, protect the quarterback, then you'll make plays at times, but you won't have that consistency that's necessary to win in the NFL, to make big plays in the fourth quarter, to come up with big conversions on third down or in the red zone. And I think what the Cardinals did in the offseason on that offensive line was very illustrative of where they fell down at times last year in physical play on the offensive line, especially on the interior. We saw Kyler Murray running for his life too much because of pressure up the middle. We saw issues with the running game. And what did the Cardinals do? They made a trade for Rodney Hudson, an excellent center from the Las Vegas Raiders. And maybe one of the most unnoticed moves they made all offseason was signing a veteran like Brian Winters, who's bounced around a little bit, but is physical and can play guard at a very good level in the NFL. We pretty much know it's going to be DJ Humphries at left tackle, Justin Pugh at left guard, and Kelvin Beacham at right tackle. But that right guard spot, I think, is going to be very fascinating to watch this preseason. We've got the returning starter, Justin Murray. We have Winters, who I mentioned. And then you have to throw Josh Jones into the mix, who was drafted in the third round last year as a tackle. That's where everyone figured he's going to end up. And who knows, maybe at some point he will. But right now he's going to be looked at very long and hard at guard in training camp. And the Cardinals are going to pick the best of those three guys to open the season. I'm going to say that Winters is the favorite. I will say that if Josh Jones can show his improvement and development from year two, that he could perhaps steal that job. But I think Winters fits in very well physically on what the Cardinals are looking for on this line. I'm going to go on a little bit of a limb and say he will win that job at right guard. But it's going to be a heck of a competition, guys.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a huge competition camp, but I just love what the Cardinals have done the last couple of years. I think in 2018, that first, or maybe it was 2019, that first year Cliff was here, they probably had the worst O-line in the country, honestly, in the NFL. I mean, we remember David Johnson picking up, 2 yards in a pile of dust every week. It seemed like he could go nowhere behind that O-line. And I think over the last couple of years, they've really improved it. DJ Humphries has really stepped up to the plate. And I think they want to have strong protection around Kyler Murray. I think the most important thing you can have for a young quarterback is a strong O-line. Kyler Murray is a small guy, like we've been saying earlier, so you don't want him to get hit. He doesn't have a big physical frame, so putting a strong O-line around Kyler Murray is super important. And like you said, that right guard position is going to be the position to watch in training camp on this offensive line.
Hey, you know what? I think 4 out of 5 solidified starting positions isn't too shabby, especially like Miller said a couple of years ago, we weren't really even sure if any of out of the 5 starting positions were solidified. Howard already touched on it. DJ Humphries has improved greatly over the last couple of years. Justin Pugh is one of the better veteran guards in the NFL. And the trade for Rodney Hudson and what they gave up in exchange for him was almost highway robbery whenever you think about it. I mean, the ability to bring Hudson in and immediately improve the offensive line has to be one of the more underrated moves of the offseason. I know Brian Winters has bounced around like Howard said, but he still looks like he'd be a viable asset that will be something to monitor through training camp and the preseason. Then, of course, Calvin Beacham, who's been with the team for a few years now, we know he can do at the right tackle position. I think you can make an argument that this offensive line is nearing borderline top 10 of the NFL, and I don't think there's a lot of argument to say that this is at least an above average offensive line, which is good news for Kyler Murray and the rest of the skill position players.
We flip to the defense now as we break down the look at all the positions on the Cardinals team as they begin training camp for the 2021 season. And the defensive line, of course, now has the celebrated J.J. Watt to add to a good young group that was showing some improvement. Now, they had a lot of injuries last year. I think one of the players really to watch on that group is Jordan Phillips, who they expected big things from last season, but injuries really affected his season. Zach Allen showed improvement. They had 2 rookies, of course, Lecky Fotu and Richard Lawrence, who were in and out of the lineup but started playing well near the end of the season. And so they have some pretty good depth on that line now. But certainly the guy that everyone's expecting so much from is J.J. Watt. And here's the thing about him, guys. He's always been known as a pass rusher, which, of course, he does very well. But he is a complete defensive end. And I think what J.J. Watt can bring to this team is in run defense is just as important as a pass rusher. Because when you can stop the run on first down, then what have you done? You've created more passing situations where your pass rushers can just tee off, hopefully, on the quarterback. So I think Watt has the potential to add a tremendous amount. Everyone's talked about his leadership, and that's legendary. But where he really has to help this team is on the field. And if he can do that both against the run and against the pass, then the Cardinals have added a great veteran player to a defense that was pretty good last year, but can get a lot better.
Yeah, my issue with J.J. Watt is kind of the same with James Conner. It's really the health history. J.J. Watt's only 2 years removed from an all-pro season in 2018, but he only played 8 games in 2019. I believe he had a pretty major injury. And then in 2020, it wasn't the same J.J. Watt, only 5 sacks in 16 games. But again, it was a terrible Houston team. So you could attribute some of that lack of success to just the team and the players he was around. So if J.J. Watt at age 32, I believe, can still have enough in the tank, I think he's probably the linchpin to this D-line. I mean, I think he still has the biggest upside and ceiling of any of these players. Maybe a Jordan Phillips or a Zach Allen can have a breakout year, but I still think J.J. Watt probably has the most talent of any of these D linemen. And if he can still reach in for the last little bit of talent he has left in the tank, I think for at least a season, he can still be a huge and major contributor to this team that potentially could be losing a major guy and a Chandler Jones that we'll probably talk about here in a few minutes.
Yeah, 5 sacks or not, I still feel like teams are going to double team JJ Watt whenever presented the opportunity. So hopefully that'll free up the space for guys like Zach Allen, guys like Lecky Fotu to work inside the interior and make some noise. This Cardinals defense, like Howard said, was pretty solid last year. And I think we'll see a lot more development from a couple of their inside linebackers, which we will talk about here in a little bit. But JJ Watt was brought in not only for his, skills on the field, but also in the locker room, his leadership on the field. And again, just, freeing other avenues up while also dominating the avenue he currently takes up. A wise man once said, if you get enough dogs in the locker room, the cats will eventually start barking. And JJ Watt is a dog.
Good way of describing it. As we move to the linebackers, and this is a very intriguing position for the Cardinals because we have a situation with Chandler Jones. We're hoping he will be in camp. By the time we see this, we'll probably know on that. But how disgruntled is he with his situation coming back from his injury? Marcus Golden returns. Of course, Hassan Reddick, who had a career year, has moved on to the Carolina Panthers. Dennis Gardeck was a revelation as a rotational guy who had 7 sacks and only 93 defensive snaps. He has already started training camp on the physically unable to perform list. They think he'll be ready pretty soon, but he does give depth there to that pass rush. And of course, you have Marcus Golden, who was acquired in a trade last season. So it's a very intriguing. That's just on the outside. Then, of course, on the inside, you have the 2 guys that Steve Keim described as 2 trees in the defense, and that's returning a second-year player Isaiah Simmons, and of course the rookie Zaven Collins. They are expecting Zaven Collins to call the defensive signals, and obviously they expect a big step from Simmons, who was probably affected last year by no offseason, no preseason games, and just missed out on a lot of snaps in preparation for his rookie year. So this group has a lot of talent. There's no doubt about that. But it might have as many question marks as maybe any other position group on this team.
Yeah, I'm looking at the inside linebacker position specifically because, like you said, Zaven Collins and Isaiah Simmons, they are high potential, high talent guys, but they just don't have a lot of experience. We haven't seen it a lot on the NFL level. So maybe there's an adjustment period for a guy like Zaven Collins, like there was for Isaiah Simmons last year. Maybe this is the Isaiah Simmons breakout year, but it might be another year or two before they're both playing on a similar level. We might see Isaiah Simmons take that leap this year, but Zaven Collins could still be lagging a little bit behind just because he doesn't have the NFL experience yet, hasn't adjusted to the NFL level yet. So this duo might not be simpatico right away, but in a couple years, this could be a formidable duo in the middle of your defense. And really, Chandler Jones too, we got to see what's going to happen and play out with that situation. I mean, he missed pretty much the whole season last year. So if he is on this team going into next season, I mean, him with Simmons, Golden, Collins, this could be a pretty solid, linebacker crew. And this could be one of the better ones in the NFL.
Yeah, I think if Gardeck plays anything like he did last year in the short amount of snaps we saw him, and I think the Cardinals might be in the running for one of the best linebacker cores in the league. I mean, you have Chandler Jones opposite of that crazy production, and that's a sight to behold for offensive lines themselves. And then you add in the insane athleticism that both Isaiah Simmons and Zaven Collins bring into the interior of the defense, and that's a struggle for both the run and passing attack. So I'm sure Van Joseph will have a lot of fun kind of trying to coordinate a lot of things with those guys, especially in the preseason training camp. We're still trying to experiment with a lot of things. But, man, I think the one word to summarize this Cardinals position group is potential. There's a lot with it with these guys.
No question about that. And I think 2 other guys to throw into the mix as well is one that many Cardinals fans have probably forgotten about, and that's Devon Canard, who there was a lot of expectations last year. He got off, and in the beginning of the season was playing pretty solid. Then there was a case of COVID, which knocked him back for a bit. Then he had another injury, and he just didn't have the season that he was hoping to have. But he is back and can also produce some pass rush off the edge. And a rookie to keep an eye on, I hope I pronounce his name right, is Victor Dimukeje, who is just incredibly quick, incredibly athletic. And so he's not going to be a guy. It's hard to say how many snaps he's going to play because there's so many other players at that position. But if he makes this 53-man roster, and even if you just put him in there for 10 or 15 snaps a day and just say, hey, get after the quarterback, he might be able to do that. All depends on how quick he learns and how fast it happens. So he's a very interesting guy to watch in that linebacker group. We conclude the defense in the secondary, and another group that has questions, especially at cornerback, where right now, if you were to write the depth chart in pencil, you probably have Robert Alford and Malcolm Butler as your starting corners, with, of course, this one's in pen, Byron Murphy Jr. in the slot. He could end up being on the outside, but the Cardinals would prefer to play him in the slot. Tay Gowan, a rookie, along with Marco Wilson from Florida State. And so they got some good young guys coming in. But I think one of the keys might be Alford. He wants to prove that the last 2 years when he missed the entire season because of injury was not what he is all about. He is 32 years old, but he hasn't played football. He hasn't had any wear and tear the last 2 years. So if he can stay healthy and play at a very good level for this team, all of a sudden what maybe looks to be a weakness on this team becomes perhaps a strength. So let's talk about the corners before we then start talking about the safeties.
Yeah, the cornerback position definitely scares me a little bit. I think Byron Murphy, there's no questions there. I think he's a stud corner. But right now with Malcolm Butler and the rest of the depth chart, I'm a little concerned. Like you said, we're kind of needing – we're going to need a Robert Alford to step up to the plate and really show that after injury, he's back to being the guy he was pre-injury. But Malcolm Butler, he had 100 tackles last year, which sounds good in theory. But that makes me think that maybe he was getting picked on a lot if he was able to generate 100 tackles combined. So I'm not too sure. He was able to get 4 picks as well. So it lets you know he has pretty good hands. But the depth of cornerback definitely scares me. Right now, that's probably the biggest position group I have a concern with outside of linebacker and running backs. I'm probably most concerned with the cornerback position right now with the Cardinals. I love Byron Murphy, but Malcolm Butler kind of scares me. He's over the age of 30. That's usually not a good sign for cornerbacks. Robert Alford has missed a couple years with injury. So this is a pretty thin cornerback room, and I'm probably most concerned for this in a pass-happy NFL that we see in modern days.
Yeah, questions everywhere. And I mean, we're talking about a Cardinals secondary that'll be without Patrick Peterson for the first time in a very long time. So, granted, I know the play of Patrick Peterson wasn't exactly up to par to his all-pro potential last year, but still missing that veteran presence and a guy who's been with the organization for so long, the effects I think will be seen at least a little bit. Byron Murphy, I really have no questions about him. I feel like you play him anywhere and he'll be pretty all right. Malcolm Butler, you know, the unsung Super Bowl hero from the Patriots Seahawks Super Bowl almost a decade ago now. Man, I'm getting old. You know, there's a few questions about him, you know, whether or not he can, you know, provide stability at the age of 30. And then Robert Alford, like you guys have already mentioned, we know what he can do, but it's a matter of actually getting on the field and staying on the field. And I don't think it's without a question that the most important ability is availability. And, you know, so far through the last couple of years, we know the talent's there, but, you know, the actual presence of him on the field just hasn't been there. And that's a really scary, serious question for the Cardinals secondary that's going to need to rely on him heading to 2021.
One other player to add to the depth mix is Darques Dinard, who was signed just before minicamp this year. He has NFL experience. So I think with all the bodies and, of course, a couple of the young guys, I think the depth might be okay. The key are the players who are going to be on the field the most, those top 3 corners, are they going to be able to do the job consistently? And I think we know that Murphy can, but the other 2 are the questions. And if they have to go behind that for guys that are going to be out there a lot, then that could be where some troubles develop. In the back end, at safety, of course, we have Buda Baker, and he's becoming a perennial All-Pro, so there's nothing to worry about there. The question becomes what happens at that other safety spot. They thought they were in pretty good shape last year with Jalen Thompson. He got hurt in the first game of the season against the 49ers, came back later, got hurt again, and it was basically a washout season for him. So what will the Cardinals do at safety? They have brought in Sean Williams, another free agent in the offseason. They drafted James Wiggins in the draft this year. And you also have some other guys like Deontay Thompson and Charles Washington for depth. But and Chris Banjo, of course, also, who's a very good special teams player. He played a lot more defensive snaps last year than he was accustomed to playing. So the real key is that safety opposite Buda Baker. If Jalen Thompson can continue what he did as a rookie and stay healthy, the Cardinals are in good hands. But if they have to go to depth, then it's going to be interesting to see who, if anyone, will step up and play at a high level.
Yeah, I think this is probably Jalen Thompson's job to lose in training camp. He had a pretty solid rookie season where he showed some flashes. Like you said, couldn't really stay on the field last year. So if he can stay healthy in training camp and show the flashes once again that we saw in his rookie year, I think he's definitely going to be that opposite safety starting Buda Baker, because Buda is a beast. I mean, he has a fun name to say. I think we all love Buda Baker. We saw him, unfortunately, get tracked down by DK Metcalf last year in that one play, but he's a stud. I don't think there's any questions around Buda Baker, but Jalen Thompson definitely has to be the guy opposite of him. I'm not really loving the depth after Jalen Thompson or Buda Baker or Chris Banjo. He's really more of a special teams kind of guy. We'll see if these other depth pieces behind them, if they show anything or flash anything in training camp. But right now, I'm putting all my eggs in the Jalen Thompson basket.
Yeah, I definitely think that's what the Cardinals are going to have to do as well, because after Thompson's basically a depth chart of names. And like Howard already said, we don't have to worry about Buda Baker. We know who Buda Baker is and what he's going to become. It's the other safety spot that we really have to worry about. And, Thompson, granted, he was hit with injuries, but I think you really have to like what we saw out of him in the small parts that we did see in 2021. But after that, the depth is definitely something to behold. I know Charles Washington and Deontay Thompson are certainly names to kind of watch out for as training camp and preseason progresses. It's all about a guy who's going to step up and make his presence felt, whether it's on special teams or in playing time like that, or just making plays, never, granted the possibility to do so. One guy is going to have to step up and, make his name known as that third rotational safety behind the Cardinals defense.
I want to say one thing about that Buda Baker play, because quite frankly, I'm tired of people talking about that as – now, granted, it was a great play by DK Metcalf, but there was not another strong safety in the NFL that wouldn't have been run down by DK Metcalf on that play. And all that focus has made everyone forget what a great play he made originally, just to intercept the ball right near the goal line in a key situation in the game and then go almost the distance. It was an unbelievable play by Buda Baker that now everybody wants to talk about. So he got caught from behind. So it's unfortunate because it's taken away the focus from what a great play that was. In fact, for the ESPYs, where the DK Metcalf play was mentioned, they should have had it. It should have been both guys should have been nominated separately just for Buda in making the play that he did and enabled DK Metcalf to overnight blow up as this unbelievable star in the National Football League. Well, we've gone through the offense and the defense, and now we don't have to spend a lot of time on special teams, but special teams are important. We know that. It's the most underrated aspect of football teams because it determines so often field position. And in the Cardinals coverage game, the big question is Dennis Gardeck going to be ready for the start of the season? He's one of their better special teams players. They lost one of their better special teams players to San Francisco in Trent Sherfield. And they have some other good ones, Tanner Vallejo and Zeke Turner and other guys who are very good on special teams. And certainly some of the younger players they drafted will probably see them out there. So that's one aspect of it. But a new kicker, Matt Prater, has arrived, and everyone hopes that now there can be confidence when he goes out there, which wasn't the case last year with Zane Gonzalez. But I'll say this, guys, I think one of the overlooked aspects of last year and some of the bad things that happened to this team, I thought Andy Lee at punter did not have a real good year. And just many times he would have a bad punt, didn't go very far, and it would lead to good field position for the other team. And then we'll talk about kick returning. It's been a minus for the Cardinals for the most part. And I think the hope is that Rondale Moore will end up at least being the punt returner and provide some big plays for that punt return unit. So I think those special teams should be watched very closely because obviously, like I said, it's a big part of teams' success. And I think there's different areas, like I noted, where I think the special teams, while very good at times, needs to be better consistently.
Yeah, I'm looking at Andy Lee's numbers now, basically looks like his last 2 years with the Cardinals were basically his lowest 2 punting yard seasons in his career. I mean, the man is going to be 39, so it makes sense that his leg is starting to give out a little bit, getting a little crickety over there with that old age. But I think Matt Prater, I mean, I'm a ASU guy. I graduated from ASU Forks Up, so I was all in on Zane Gonzalez. I mean, this was the greatest kicker in basically NCAA history, and he didn't really live up to the expectations. So Matt Prater probably will be an upgrade there. I mean, we've seen him kick 56-yard field goals back in Denver, back in Detroit. So this guy's a stud. I think definitely you got some question marks with the return game, but Andy Isabella, maybe he could step up as the punt returner. They have him listed as that right now on the depth chart because it looks like he might lose his spot as the number 3 and number 4 wide receiver.
Yeah, and kind of touching on the punt return position, I don't think there's any doubting exactly how impactful that can be, because if you do have a true bona fide return man back there, that'll force special teams, punters and coaches that try to focus on getting the ball out of bounds as opposed to, kicking it into the punt return man, which will more times than not lead to better field position. So a guy like Rondell Moore, who excels in space with the ball in his hand, can do a lot of wonders for the Cardinals special teams unit.
And the one other aspect of it are kickoffs. Is Matt Prater going to be the guy? Can he be that guy that routinely gets the ball into the end zone where the kickoffs are not returned? Or does somebody else end up having to do the kicking off, which some teams in the NFL do? That's going to be something I think to watch in training camp, and especially as the preseason games come around, how those kickoffs are looking, because again, that can be a big part of that field position that we were talking about. And we have completed our look at the Cardinals' positions entering training camp. And now we end this first podcast of the summer in the 2021 season with each of our number one question to be answered during training camp. We talked about a lot of the different things during our positional breakdowns, but now it's time to just hone in on, in all of our minds, what is the most deepest, most important question to be answered in training camp as we get ready for the opening of the regular season.
Yeah, for me, it's probably going to be how does that running back room split carries? Is it going to be the Chase Edmonds show with a little sprinkle of James Conner? Is it going to be 50-50? Is it going to be, Conner between the 20s, Chase Edmonds in the red zone? And part of that is because of my selfishness. I love fantasy, so I need to know who to draft in this upcoming season. But Chase Edmonds, he's definitely that explosive kind of guy. I think he's going to be like an Austin Eckler type. James Conner, we know what he is as well from his days back in Pittsburgh. But the biggest question mark with him, as we were saying earlier in the pod, is his health. So if he's healthy, this could be a formidable 1-2 punch. I think both of them can complement each other nicely. James Conner being a little bit more of that bruiser kind of back, even though he's not really much of a bruiser. He's more of that in-between tackles kind of guy that wants to run through you just a little bit. And then Chase Edmonds is that guy that wants to bounce it outside or take a catch over the middle of the field. So I think this is going to be a nice duo. I just need to know who should I draft in fantasy.
Oh man, well, sooner or later, I feel like that question will be answered for you, Millard, with fantasy drafts popping up pretty much all over the country, with the arrival of training camp and preseason. So let us know, exactly where those guys go in your draft leagues. Appreciate you. The biggest question I have isn't necessarily on the field for the receiving corps. Larry Fitzgerald still hasn't reported. We don't know if and or when he will show up. But, obviously there's no understating, the loss that comes with the leadership without his presence in the locker room. So my biggest question for the Arizona Cardinals is, who is going to step in? A team that always makes a Super Bowl run, a playoff run like the Cardinals are expected to this year. A team always has a handful of leaders on their team. We know a guy like J.J. Watt brings that, but what about the offensive side of the ball? Who's going to carry that ball from the sideline to the middle of the hash marks in the 49ers game to ensure you guys get another playoff? Who's going to rally the troops whenever you guys need it most? Is it going to be Kyler Murray? Is it going to be DeAndre Hopkins, Rodney Hudson? There's a handful of guys that will need to do that in order for the Cardinals offense and their team in general to take that next leap into a borderline playoff team year in and year out.
All right, so to me to wrap this up, and I'm going to do a little double header here of a question to be answered. One on the field, which is, to me, the biggest question is at cornerback. I think there's talent there, but We talked about Robert Alford and some of the other younger guys stepping up. And if they can, I think this team can have a pretty good cornerback unit. But I'm going to go a little intangible here. And you alluded to it with leadership, Donnie. There's one word that is the key to winning on any and not at any level, but in any sport. And that word is finish. I think we all in Phoenix would be celebrating an NBA title if the Suns had been able to finish, especially games 4 and 5, when they had a chance in the last minute to take a lead and weren't able to do it, entered the fourth quarter tied and weren't able to finish that game. We saw with the Cardinals last year, the last 2 years, in fact. Well, more so last year. They weren't able to finish the season. And in many cases, they weren't able to finish games where they had a lead in the fourth quarter, that they had the ball with an opportunity to put a team away and get a 2-score lead, and they weren't able to do it. So to me, that is the biggest question. It won't be answered in training camp or preseason, because you don't know until the games begin if you have a team that's capable of finishing, of guys coming up with the play to win the game consistently in the fourth quarter, and with timeout management, game management, all those things. That should be a focus in training camp, a mindset that takes over a team. And you always hear it. We have to learn how to win. Well, it's not like you can open a playbook and there's guidelines there. Well, this is how you win. Well, we all know how you win. You score more points than the other team. That's pretty simplistic. But what it is having that confidence and that ability to just make the plays to win the game. And that, to me, is the biggest question with this Cardinals team. It's a tough schedule. It's a tough division. And you have to finish games against the good teams on your schedule if you're going to be in that playoff hunt. So we'll see if this team can develop that mindset. A lot of that mindset comes down to the leadership that's on the team. But leadership only goes so far. It still has to be the players that make the plays. And that's what we'll learn from this Cardinals team in 2021 if they have what it takes. And that wraps up our first Cardinals Pod. I was kind of thinking that was a pretty good end there, but I'll give the nice go away. We'll be doing this a lot more during training camp, and we'll be all over training camp with reports and stories and all the things that happen as the Cardinals are in training camp. Before we know it, guys, they're going to be playing their first game of the preseason games this year, Friday, August 13th, right around the corner with the Dallas Cowboys. So we'll be right there on si.com/NFL/Cardinals to bring it to you all. So have a good day, everyone, and keep coming, and we'll have more of these podcasts for you.